This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to announce the release of my new book, Obama's True Legacy: How He Transformed America. There's a reason why Mike Huckabee calls it a ferocious and chilling read. Order it now at Amazon.com or at FrontPageMag.com. Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, what an honor and privilege it is to have with us Dennis Prager, the great conservative, nationally syndicated radio talk show host, political commentator, and founder of PragerU, and about 2 million other things. Dennis, what an honor to have you on the Glazov Gang.
It's my honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Would I be correct that in all of your career, being on the Glazov Gang is kind of the height and peak of your life?
There's no close second.
Fantastic. Dennis, I thought I would begin with something this evening that's very close to my heart, which is you. I come from the Soviet Union. My parents were dissidents there. My dad and my mom, they risked their lives. They risked going to the Gulag. They stood up for freedom. And we got out of there. It's a very long story. But as a very young kid, I grew up at a dinner table with Solzhenitsyn being discussed, Sakharov, Anatoly Sharansky, Vladimir Bukovsky. My dad gave me all these books to read by Robert Conquest and Varlam Shalamov. And I spent my childhood and my youth very worried about the people persecuted in the Soviet Union. They were on my mind. I dedicated my life to fighting the ideas that created that monstrosity and to defend the people that were suffering under it. And there was a man called Dennis Prager that was very loud in a sea of betrayal in the West. There was a man called Dennis Prager, named Dennis Prager, that stood up valiantly and nobly for the people suffering behind the Iron Curtain. I wanted to begin that discussion with you tonight on that topic. Thank you for that, Dennis. And I think that in a time when moral values and clarity is so blurred, I think that's the perfect way to begin. Let me hand it over to you.
Well, you've touched a very sensitive part of my life. So let me briefly tell you and your viewers and listeners my story in this regard. For reasons that are somewhat unknowable, I decided that I wanted to study communism at a very early age because I knew it was evil, and had I been alive earlier, I would have studied German and Nazism, but I was born after the war, and I was born during the Cold War, so I wanted to understand communism. I knew it was evil, and I knew that many in the West were not prepared to call communism evil. They were prepared to call anti-communists evil. That's like a forerunner of today. It's not Hamas and all the Palestinians who support Hamas that are evil. It's Israel that is evil. We live in a morally inverted world. So I studied the Russian language, and I did it for only one reason: not to speak it, not to read Dostoevsky, but to read Pravda. I wanted to read. I was always fascinated by lies. How do people sell the opposite of truth? And so I wanted to read Pravda. Jumping forward, I'll go back in a moment, but jumping forward all these years, I never imagined that learning to read Pravda would prepare me to read Western newspapers and listen to the BBC or CBC or NPR. It is the last thing that would have entered my mind. I thought I was just studying the Soviet Union and the satellite countries. So when I was 20, I was in Israel for the Passover holiday visiting, and people who knew me in Israel just knew me just as Dennis. I wasn't Dennis Prager, so to speak. I was just Dennis, but they knew that I knew Russian and Hebrew, and they every year would send young Jews who were not Israeli, because they couldn't send Israelis into the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union had broken relations with Israel after the Six-Day War. So they sent non-Israeli Jews into the Soviet Union to smuggle in Jewish items and smuggle out Jewish names. And I was sort of the ideal person because I was so young, knew Russian, knew Hebrew, and knew Judaism. So I was sent in for a month, and in the height of the Cold War, I came back to the United States a month later, and I began lecturing constantly, just for a couple of years, a few times a week around the United States on behalf of Soviet Jewry. That's how my public life began. That's what you're referring to, I assume.
Yes.
I was a loud voice, I admit it. And my heart went out to Soviet Jews living in that prison while I was a free person in America.
Thank you, Dennis. Do you remember when they exchanged Sharansky? I was just a little kid, and I remember on that there was a bridge, I think it happened in Germany, in Berlin, but he walked curvy, and he later said that they told him to walk straight, and Sharansky had stood up to the KGB till the very last second.
Of course, I actually, Sharansky came to New York City in the 70s, and he spoke in Hebrew, and I translated his speech while he gave it. So you're talking about my early life here. I mean, these are not names. These are real people to me.
Absolutely. Dennis, we just want a little bit of a window into Dennis Prager because we can get into the debates and the issues, and hopefully we'll get into them today. But I'm very interested in the individual that was born in Brooklyn. If I'm correct, your dad was the son of Polish Jewish immigrants. And you had attended a yeshiva, and in grade 10, if my investigation is correct, you became friends with an individual named Joseph Telushkin. But Dennis Prager did not become the kind of Jewish man like Bernie Sanders. He didn't become a Chomsky that traveled to Lebanon to embrace Nasrallah. You didn't become that kind of Jewish individual that you've written about recently and we want to talk about. You became a different kind of Jewish man. Tell us a little bit about the childhood that I've referred to and perhaps the influences on you during your childhood.
Yes, I went to yeshiva till I was 19. For those who don't know what a yeshiva is, it's all day studies, half the day religious studies, half the day secular studies. The religious studies were all in Hebrew, so that accounted for my knowing Hebrew. And I realized at a very young age that the ultimate battle was really the biblical worldview versus the leftist worldview. And that is absolutely correct. Today, you can be an atheist and understand that that's the battle. You don't have to be a believer to acknowledge that that is the battle. And I knew this at a very early age, but what animated me more than any other thing, and it's true to this day, is I hate evil. And I will just note that I didn't know till, well, I guess I knew it early, but I didn't take cognizance of it. My favorite verse in the Hebrew Bible, and I'm up to volume 5 of my commentary on the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah. So I know it pretty well. But my favorite verse in the entire Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament, as Christians refer to it, is those of you who love God must hate evil. It's a command. Hebrew has a command form, English does not. So we use the word must. In other words, if you don't hate evil, you don't love God. The majority of humanity does not hate evil. The majority of humanity denies evil. There was a famous book, I think it was from the 80s or maybe the 70s, maybe the 60s, but it's a while ago. It's called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. It's considered a classic. And in my view, there is a much bigger denial than that of death. It's the denial of evil. And I learned it in particular from the left and liberals. Well, not liberals. I distinguish between left and liberals. I knew I was not a leftist. I thought I was a liberal much of my life, and to some extent, I'm still a liberal. But anyone who's true to liberal values is a conservative. I mean, but you can ask me about it, but that's a separate issue. And I realized that it was not chic to hate communism. It was chic to hate people who hated communism. They were called Cold Warriors, as if that there was something wrong in being a Cold Warrior. That was a very noble thing to be. If anti-Nazi it was noble, then anti-communist is noble. If you only hate Nazism and not communism, it means you don't hate evil. It means you hate Nazism, but it doesn't mean you hate evil. So that's the most animating aspect of my life is a hatred of evil and a belief that what God wants is that we hate evil and do good. So I have a very universal religious outlook. I am a committed religious Jew, but it's a very universal outlook, which is why I do so much work with Christians.
Well, thank you, Dennis. And the Jew hatred we see today on American campuses throughout the world. I mean, this is just, when we think about what Hamas did on October 7th and the atrocities that they committed, and yet so much of the world is cheering them on. And you've studied anti-Semitism, written about anti-Semitism. And one of the themes you hit upon, and this always fascinated me, that so many anti-Semites, they're motivated by the hatred of the people that brought conscience to the world. That the Jews are the chosen people in the sense that not necessarily that they're superior or better, but they were given the assignment of bringing God's law to people. And you've touched on that very much. Could I hand that over to you? I think that this is one of the central layers of what we see going on today in terms of anti-Semitism.
So 45 years ago, Joseph Tilishkin and I wrote a book called Why the Jews? The Reason for Anti-Semitism. And it's going to be in its 4th edition. It's never gone out of print. And I believe it's a powerful explanation of Jew hatred, which is the real word. Anti-Semitism is a joke as a term, as nothing Semites. It was created in 1876 by a German Jew hater. He called it he said, I'm an anti-Semite, but it's too bad he didn't just say I'm a Jew hater. But anyway, that's what it is. And so you mentioned chosenness. Chosenness is definitely one of the reasons that Jews have been hated for so long. So this is a really important point that I'm about to make. One would think that if any group said God chose them, you would think they're basically lunatics. I mean, if somebody walked over to you or anyone on the street and said, I just want you to know God chose me, you would, if you were in a charitable mood, you would say, you know, I have the name of a wonderful therapist. I think you should see him or her. So this is really significant, the point, again, that I'm about to make. Jews were not considered nuts for that belief. And I'll give you 2 other nations that had similar beliefs, but nobody hated them for it. The Japanese believe they get the sun before any other country. It's the land of the rising sun. The sun is on the Japanese flag for that reason. Now, no non-Japanese thinks Japan gets the sun before anyone else. Nobody gets the sun before anyone else. The world is round. So, but we don't care. Nobody hates the Japanese because they think they get the sun first. Our view is, if you're not Japanese, you believe that, that's wonderful, have a nice day. The Chinese, The word for China in Chinese is Middle Kingdom, meaning middle of the earth, the center of the world. It's basically they're the center and barbarians surround them. That's been the Chinese view. Does anybody non-Chinese think it's the center of the world? No. Do we care? No, we don't care. But the Jews, one of the tiniest people in the history of the world, they said they're chosen, and they weren't dismissed like that. And the reason is because so many people believed it, including the anti-Semite. This is the point. Deep down, there is a sense the Jews are different. And the Jews brought in, this is many non-Jewish historians have noted this. This is not a Jewish point of view. The Jews brought into the world a morally demanding and judging God. There had never been such a thing prior to the Hebrew Bible, that there was one God who had one moral judgment for all of the world. Zeus didn't judge the world. Jupiter didn't judge the world. Baal didn't judge the world. No other God judged the world. The God the Jews brought into the world did. And people don't want to be judged. And so the Jews, the combination of what the Jews brought into the world, including the Ten Commandments and chosenness and critical, the higher quality of Jews' lives. I don't mean richer. I don't mean just financially, because there have always been a lot of poor Jews. But for example, throughout Jewish history that we have recorded, the overwhelming majority of Jewish women were always literate. There is no other group of whom we know that to be true. So what you have here is, instead of saying, gee, the Jews seem to have gotten their act together in many ways, maybe we could emulate them. This is George Gilder, who's not Jewish. His brilliant thesis in his book, The Israel Test. And he has a 5-minute video on this at PragerU. People should watch it. And he said, watch what the Israel test is. How do you react to those who have done better? Do you say, gee, I would like to do better too? Or do you want to destroy them? That's the issue. Hamas has made pure evil, as Douglas Murray, this magnificent non-Jew, has noted so often. Gaza could have been Singapore on the Mediterranean. Instead, it's an S-hole, and it was made that way by Hamas. The billions and billions of dollars that are poured in have not built hospitals or schools or done anything good. They built tunnels so as to murder Jews. These are the Nazis of our time, and if one doesn't recognize that, one's conscience is not working.
Amen. Very profound and sacred words, Dennis. I'm of the Christian faith, you're of the Jewish faith. A lot conflates. We have a lot in common. Dennis, throughout my studies, I'm not saying that this is by any means original, but because I've always tried to understand these leftist impulses and what they believe and what you're saying. They don't want to be judged. And I'm coming to the conclusion also on one of the layers that leftists also want to avoid the final judgment, afterlife. They hate the concept of a creator, of God. And not only do they not want to be judged here, but throughout their politics, there's somewhere there where they're trying to erase the final judgment in a spiritual sense. What do you think?
Oh, it's entirely accurate. That's correct. Let's put it this way. If there is a God and God is just, leftists are screwed.
Absolutely. Dennis, your recent article, Sick Jews. Wow. Well, all your articles amaze me. But in my life, I've always been fascinated. I remember I was just a young kid and I'm saying to my dad, why do these leftist professors love Castro? They'll die within 30 seconds if they go over there. And my dad put a book by Paul Hollander called Political Pilgrims on the table when I was 12, and it changed my life just to understand how these fellow travelers traveled to the Soviet Union, to Mao, Mao's China, they went there to praise this totalitarian entity, and they were just devoured by it. And we look at these women dressed in black niqabs in Pakistan and other places in the Muslim world, and they walk around with whips and they whip the women that aren't dressed properly, trying to ingratiate themselves with their potential executioners. And we see some of these Jews that say, oh, those are the bad Jews over there, Dennis Prager and Jews like that. I'm the good one. But then when they're finally invited to the rooftop party, a lot of times it doesn't go the way they think it will. But we have these leftist Jews, even right now at this very moment, supporting the monstrous entity that will devour them. I've spent my life trying to understand this psychology. Your brilliant recent article, Sick Jews, really capsulizes it very, very succinctly. Tell us about it.
So there are a number of things operating here, and I know Jews rather well. Among other things, my introduction to Judaism, now in print since I wrote it at 25 years of age. It's the most widely read introduction to Judaism in English. So I have pretty deep understanding of Judaism and Jews. Number one, when Jews leave traditional Jewish beliefs, like the Torah is from God, or even just the Ten Commandments, they don't stop being religious. They adopt or even create secular religions. That's what all leftism is. These are environmentalism, feminism, socialism, Marxism. These are all substitutes for Bible-based religion. So when Jews leave Judaism, they don't become irreligious. They gravitate to a secular religion, which is some form of leftism. By the way, vast numbers of Christians do too. And I explain this, and when Christians hear this, they go, wow, that makes sense, and they never thought of it. Most people haven't thought of this, sadly, but so I want to share this. When Jews abandon Judaism, they're still called Jews. When Christians abandon Christianity, they're not called Christians. So we Jews are stuck with every fool who happens to have been born to a Jewish parent. Christians are not stuck with every fool who was born to a Christian parent. So when we ask, it's a totally legit question, why are many Jews on the left? Why are many Christians on the left? So people say, well, they're not really. Oh, yes, they are, but they're just not called Christian. And properly so. But Jews are still called Jews. George Soros has infinitely less in common with Judaism than you, a Christian, does. You are a far better Jew than George Soros. Okay, you are much closer to Jewish beliefs than George Soros or Norman Finkelstein or Bernie Sanders. I mean, the list is gigantic. So, and by the way, the proof of what I said is that Jews who stay religious are conservative. They're not on the left. Orthodox Jews are overwhelmingly conservative. And that would be the equivalent, if you will, of believing Christians. That those are our believing Jews. But people don't think of it that way because they call anyone born to a Jewish parent. They call Karl Marx a Jew, but his grandparents. It's true. Both grandfathers were Orthodox rabbis, but his father converted. Not because he believed in Christianity, but he converted so that he could assimilate and baptized Karl Marx. But Karl Marx is called a Jew. I mean, was he a baptized Jew? So, anyway, I hope that helps explain. Yeah. The other is you alluded to. There is a psychological aspect. If I side with those who want to exterminate the Jews, maybe they won't exterminate me.
Trying to ingratiate yourselves.
It's sort of the Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, the Stockholm Syndrome. So, Dennis, today we see what Biden is doing. We know that Obama betrayed Israel for sure, but this is quite a betrayal in and of itself. What is the Jewish psychology of the Jews that are still ready to vote Democrat, still ready to vote Biden? One word is sick. There's a self-hatred there. There's a rebellion against the Creator. I mean,
Well, I don't think it's a self-hatred
you don't think it's a
necessarily.
self-hatred?
No, maybe among some there might be,
Mhm.
like Norman Finkelstein, but
Yeah.
he's sort of an aberration, and he's particularly pathologic. Look, Finkelstein himself, I know this from him. I watched him say this on Piers Morgan, and he said he was raised by parents who supported Stalin. So he's an apple that has not fallen far from the tree. His parents believed in evil, and he believes in evil. You know, he's a source of great pride and joy to his dead parents. There's no question. They would have supported the Hamas just as he does. I mean, there's no difference between Hamas and Stalin. So the reason that most Jews will still vote for Biden, in my opinion, I mean, I'm not a prophet, but I suspect so, is this I know, having grown up as a Jewish New Yorker who went to Columbia. I mean, I have all the liberal credentials, and it is programmed into you that anything right of center is going to lead to another Hitler. That is the gigantic success of the left, that it has programmed not just Jews, but vast numbers of people into thinking that right wing elides into Auschwitz. So therefore, no matter how despicable the Democratic Party is, having been taken over by the left, no longer liberal, it won't matter. You can't vote for Hitler.
And Dennis, absolutely. I think that that's brilliant. You're dead on. And I think, well, there's many layers. I think to add to that, they're terrified of losing their community, because once they leave the left is unforgiving. You've lost all your friends.
That's an excellent point. I hadn't thought of making that, but you're 100% right. There's a sociological aspect. That's right. If you tell you'll lose your kids. You won't only lose your friends, you'll lose your own children, because in an unprecedented development, there are millions of adult children who don't speak to a parent because of politics. This is unheard of in American history. And by the way, our side doesn't do it.
Yeah.
I have as much loathing of Biden as they do of Trump. But if my parents were still alive and they voted for Biden, you think I wouldn't honor them? I would honor them if for no other reason than God told me to in the Ten Commandments. But Jews on the left don't believe in the Ten Commandments.
I guess class hatred is the replacement for the Ten Commandments.
Well, what we have, yes, that's correct. I mean, because the Bible divides the world between good and evil, whereas they divide the world between rich and poor. That's what Marx did. But the new Marxists don't divide the world between rich and poor as much as they do between strong and weak, and white and non-white.
In order to keep fascinating discussions like this continuing, we got to take a break with our sponsors. We'll be right back.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The My Pillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0.
Wow, it's so soft and smooth.
It's cool to the touch. How did you do that?
Well, we took My Pillow's patented fill and combined it with this new technology that we didn't have back then when I invented My Pillow to bring you the best pillow in history, My Pillow 2.0. Just like all of you, I never imagined that My Pillow could get any better. That's why I haven't changed it in nearly 20 years. Then I heard about a revolutionary new technology, and I knew I had to bring it to you all. MyPillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of MyPillow.
The MyPillow 2.0 is cooler and softer than the last MyPillow. It is so comfortable to sleep on at night. I look forward to going to bed, and I wake up well rested in the morning.
Sleep is all about temperature and height. MyPillow 2.0's patented adjustable fill is going to give you the exact individual support you need from your head to your bed. And now here's where it gets even better. We've all experienced those temperature-related sleep interruptions where you get too hot, you toss and turn, you flip your pillow over to the cool side. Well, all that's gone with my brand new MyPillow 2.0 cooling fabric that's made with temperature-regulating thread.
The best sleep just got even better. Whether you have a MyPillow or not, you need to get the brand new MyPillow 2.0. Call or go to MyPillow.com now. Use your promo code, and for a limited time when you buy one, you'll get a second one absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
Visit mypillow.com.
And that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure to go to mypillow.com or mystore.com and use promo code GG21. You can get a discount of up to 60% off on all the amazing products. And you're helping out Mike Lindell and his great cause. And you're also helping the Glazov Gang. And if you like one-of-a-kind handmade art, make sure to go to lutfstudio.com and purchase resin art pieces made by our producer, the one and only Annie Cyrus. Make sure to use promo code Glazov to get special discounts. And we are back with the one and only Dennis Prager. Dennis, how are your pillows coming along?
To be honest, and I'm not being paid to say this,
Okay.
I do sleep on a MyPillow, and I have for years. It's fantastic.
We're going to maybe have to...
Cool, and it stays firm. So what else can you ask for?
This is great. We're going to run this clip in all of our shows going forward. Dennis, it's very interesting. During the Second World War, there wasn't this great talk about proportionality. We have to be proportionate with our bombing of Dresden. We have to be proportionate with our bombing of Tokyo and with Hiroshima, Nagasaki. When the Americans were fighting in Mosul and Fallujah, there wasn't too much talk of proportionality. Now all of a sudden there's all this talk about Israel, that things have to be proportional. I find it mind-boggling that when you're fighting against evil, there has to be proportion. And we're fighting against monsters that hold babies under hospitals, knowing that the force is trying to get them won't do it, because the Israelis don't want to kill innocent people, don't want to kill babies. Hamas holds babies up so that they'll die. And yet, I think we could argue a million things, but for somebody like me, that's all I need. That's all I need for moral clarity in terms of the good and the bad. But something seems very blurry now, doesn't it? Everybody's talking about proportion. They're talking about genocide. They don't really know the definition, I guess, of the word. They're talking about stolen land, and those of us that know about history know that no land was ever stolen. It was simply land carved out of the Ottoman Empire. Tell us a little bit your view of these bizarre arguments that the left has brought into this conflict.
Well, your point is perfect. Nobody argued for proportional deaths among Germans or Japanese in World War II. The proportion of German civilians killed versus, let's say, American or British civilians it was what is it, 1,000 to 1, 10,000 to 1 vis-a-vis American civilians. It's not, there were no American civilians, so to speak of, who were killed. And while there was bombing of Britain, it's incomparable to the bombing of Germany. But people didn't speak that way. They said, Hitler, Nazis, you surrender, we stop bombing. And that's what Israel has said over and over. Hamas, you surrender, we stop bombing. But, look what's happening now at Eurovision, that annual competition of songs from, musicians from, 40, 50 countries. And Israel has been included. And the Israeli woman who was singing there, It's in Malmo in Sweden this year. The Israeli woman was told by the Israeli security people, the Shin Bet, don't leave your hotel except when you're going to perform. And when she rehearsed, thousands and thousands of young people booed her. The brainwash of young people around the world should scare people. These are truly moral idiots, useful idiots for bad. Greta Thunberg wears a keffiyeh. I mean, I knew that she was a fool because of her incomprehensible ravings about climate change, but it's not surprising. She knows as much about the Middle East as I do the Swedish language, but that's it doesn't matter. You don't have to know anything. You have to believe. I mean, the lie, this gigantic lie of genocide. But there are 5 times as many Palestinians today as when Israel was created. It's the least effective genocide in the history of the world. The term was developed to explain what the Germans did to the Jews in World War II, and now this is being used against the Jews. Why doesn't the world just demand that Hamas surrender? It'll end everything. It's over. That's it. Let them surrender. And proportionality. So let's say Israel burns alive 12 Palestinian families, rapes X number of Palestinian women. Is that proportional? What does proportionality mean? I don't even know what it means, let alone that it's morally absurd. But it's very frightening to see what's happening on campuses. And I'll tell you what's the most frightening, not the students. It is the cowards, the wimps who run our universities. That's what's really frightening. You take over our university and to prove it. Well, let's say a pro-life group took over Harvard Square or Columbia in front of Hamilton Hall. Let us say that happened. Would they allow them to set up camp on the Columbia campus? They would run out of town within a day.
Or people with MAGA hats on.
Oh, people! Oh my God! That's correct. The police would be called in, and
35 years in prison.
Well, certainly years.
Dennis, Israel has got to get into Rafah. They've got to destroy Hamas. Hamas even announces they're not interested in any ceasefire. They're going to be doing October 7th over and over and over again. It's in their charter. But Biden is betraying Israel. And the reports even coming out that he's withholding arms and he's doing a whole bunch of stuff. Why is the American president, this administration, why is it doing this?
Well, in 2 words, Dearborn, Michigan. In more than 2 words, because of the leftist influence in what was once a liberal party. I always draw the distinction between liberalism and leftism. They have nothing in common except liberals vote for leftists. If it weren't for liberals, the left would have no power. But there is nothing in common between liberalism and leftism. That's the tragedy of the West in a nutshell, or certainly of the United States, is that liberals don't vote their values. The left votes their values, the right votes their values, but liberals don't vote their values. That's the tragedy. And so the combination of the left and this first and second generation immigrant from the Muslim world, who brought with them a Nazi-like Jew hatred. That's the Democratic Party today, and that is happening. The West is being overrun by the left and Islamists. I don't say Muslims because Islamist is a fundamentalist Muslim. There are some wonderful Muslims, everybody knows that, but that's beside the point, though. The majority are Islamist, and that their values are inimical to Western civilization, and so are the left. That's why the left has nothing in common with the Islamist except for a love of totalitarianism. But they have one thing in common: the common enemy, the West. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and therefore the enemy, the Islamist of my enemy, the West, is my friend. And that's that. Well, everything you see on campus is either Islamist or leftist.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, Dennis. And in my study as well, just to add to that, and of course it's interconnected with it all, the Sharia supporters will build Sharia on the ashes of the America they want to destroy, and the left will build its classless utopia on the ashes of the America it wants to destroy. So they share common bonds in terms of destruction, but then when and if they take power in this generation, we know from the past that somebody begins to eat the other ones, right?
That's right. And the only question is which will eat whom. And my suspicion is that the Islamist will eat the left.
Dennis, we have a couple minutes left. Always very sad to let brilliant, good people go when it's the end of my show. I was so moved by your video on the thoughts on the death of my dog.
Oh.
And video, you have an article, and some people will think, well, why do you want to end with this? No, it's I think it's, when we put all the pieces to the puzzle together, you made some very profound points there. I'm sorry to bring this up, by the way, because it's in many respects,
it's quite all right.
It's a death of a family member on many levels, but as you pointed out, we don't want to also confuse pets and animals with humans, and you made some very powerful points there. I'm sorry about the passing of Otto. You spoke very movingly and lovingly about Otto. Just tell us a little bit about the passing of Otto and just some of the lessons that you would like to share.
Well, the article was, as you point out, really two themes. One, the genuine loss that a family feels when a beloved pet dies. I mean, there's no denying that, and it's perfectly legitimate. But I wrote about something that I've worried about all of my life, and that is the equation of human and animal life, which is a function of secularism, like every stupid idea is. And by the way, I mean that literally. There is no secular institution that has wisdom. I defy someone to name one. Harvard, Yale, Berkeley, teachers' unions. Tell me a secular institution that has wisdom. Now, there are some secular individuals who do, but there is no institution. The post-Judeo-Christian age is the age of anti-wisdom. And wisdom is the sine qua non of goodness. You can't be good based on good intentions. You have to have wisdom to be good. So anyway, what we have in our secular post-Judeo-Christian age is the equation of humans with animals. PETA, the biggest animal rights organization on earth, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and people could go on the internet and search this. This is at least 15 years old, this campaign. It's called Holocaust on Your Plate. And what they do is they equate the barbecuing of chickens with the cremating of the Jews in the Holocaust. And I discovered this when I first began lecturing in my 20s. And I would ask students around the country, if you could save your dog or a stranger first, if both were drowning, which would you save first? And for 40 years, I've gotten the same answer. 1/3 say the dog, 1/3 say the stranger, 1/3 doesn't know. Question is too difficult. It's a very dangerous thing to equate humans and animals. But in a post-biblical age, you will equate the two. The Bible says man is created in God's image, man and woman, obviously, the human being, but not animals.
And of course, we're stressing the love of dogs, the love of pets, absolutely. But the point that you're making, Dennis, especially when I was in grad studies, there was a couple people, if you talked about the murder of unborn babies, they're just stone cold. But the same people would start sobbing if you stepped on a spider. There's something very, I think wrong could be one word with.
Christy Nome
Yeah.
shot her dog, and she wrote about it,
Mm.
and she gets death threats. But if she would have put a child she was carrying to death, who was perfectly healthy, and she was perfectly healthy in the last trimester when the child was perfectly viable, anyone who condemned her would be considered evil. Your point is entirely accurate.
But Dennis, it says, "Let us make man in our own image," and that does mean something, right?
Well, to Christians, it certainly means the Trinity. I'm well aware of that, and I'm a big respecter of Christians and their theology, as is well known. I think I'm the biggest defender of Christians in America who's not a Christian. But as a believing Jew who's not a Christian, I don't see it as the Trinity. And I've written a 500-page commentary on Genesis, as I have of Deuteronomy and Numbers and Exodus, and now I'm finishing Leviticus. So I know this, much of it in Hebrew by heart. This is, and I will tell you, I have not come up with a perfect answer to the question. And by the way, the Trinity is not the perfect answer either. It's a belief answer. We should never confuse, and a lot of people do. Faith is faith, and certitude is certitude. I believe that deeply in God, the Creator described in Genesis, but I am not as certain as I am of my talking to you now on Zoom. See, otherwise the word faith loses its meaning. So it's a faith statement that the verse refers to the Trinity, a faith statement I deeply respect, but we don't know it does. A Christian believes it does, and it's an honorable, understandable belief. I don't know if there is a literal answer. When the Pope speaks, he uses the plural we. When God speaks, it would be odd in a certain sense, and this is a view that goes back thousands of years. For God to say, "I will make man in my image," it's less humble than "let us make man in our image." And I think that there might be a lesson in humility. I have another theory, which I do write about, and this was something I heard, interestingly, from an Orthodox rabbi, and that is God was speaking to the animals, that because the human being is partly divine and partly animal, and our task is to live the divine part and not the animal part. But in reality, we are a combination of the divine and the animal. And that has remained the most compelling explanation I have ever heard of that sentence.
Fascinating. And I also, of course, meant the context of "let us make man in our own image," that creating man and humans is different than creating animals.
Oh, yes, exactly. As I said, animals are not created in God's image.
Yeah. Dennis, do you think maybe you went the wrong way? And I think you might have been a great rabbi. What do you think?
I thought about being a rabbi because I studied pretty much what rabbis study, and I've written a massive amount on Judaism. I taught Jewish history at City University of New York. But I decided I would be more effective as Mr. than rabbi. It was a good decision.
Dennis, you mentioned about your defense of Christians. I have a million thank yous to you, but how many shows have I watched you on? And out of the blue, a Jewish American begins to talk about what's happening to Christians in Nigeria, in West Africa.
Well,
bringing
here's
up
the killer. How many Christians are talking about it?
right? And so I want to thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, because speaking about genocides, there really is a genocide of Christians, and nobody's talking about it, but Dennis Prager is. Thank you. But go ahead.
Well, no, I'm very touched that you know about it, and you're right, I've been doing this for a while. It shows you it's all about Israel hatred. It has nothing to do with caring about Palestinians. Because how about this? Almost no one knows this. 500,000 Ethiopians have been slaughtered in the last few years, just few years, 500,000, because of a breakaway province called Tigray. You know why no one cares? Because the blacks are being killed by blacks. They're not being killed by whites. They're not being killed by Israelis. They're not being killed by Christians. They're not being killed by Jews. So the left doesn't give a damn.
Terrible. Thank you, Dennis. If you had 60 seconds to say something to our audience in these troubling times, something you want them to walk away thinking about, what would be your final words of wisdom?
I have a number of mottos that guide my life, and here's one. And that is, let's see, let me get it back into my brain. Oh, yes. Despair is a sin. That's what I'd like to leave your audience with. I'll give you another one. If you don't fight, don't complain. There are two for you. And may I ask your viewers to please read my columns on the internet and go to PragerU and read my commentary on the Bible. There are 5,000 reviews on Amazon, and they speak about how it's changed their life. And wow. I would love, it's called the Rational Bible.
Okay, so just before we go, let's be a little bit more specific where people, all you got to do is put in Dennis Prager and you're all over the place. But for those maybe that don't know, so just specifically, where do people go to check out Dennis Prager? I know there's a million places. But
the books are the Rational Bible. The websites are DennisPrager.com and PragerU, as in Prager University. And I do a fireside chat every week. There are 350 weeks worth up. I only missed one, only because I couldn't demand that they come to my home, the staff, when I had COVID. I was totally happy to do it, but I couldn't demand that they come. So I only missed one in 350 weeks. So it's called the fireside chat. And just people should know that PragerU has 1 billion views a year, and the great majority are people under 35 years of age. Wow. So there's something healthy and beautiful on the internet for young people. And I mean young, both kids and people in their 20s.
All good things must come to an end, including a conversation with Dennis Prager. Dennis, thank you so much for being on the front lines, for standing up so nobly, so courageously, so wisely, for the truth, for freedom. The Glazov Gang loves you very much. Keep up the good fight, okay?
Well, Dennis loves the Glazov Gang.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, DennisPrager.com. If you're not following Dennis Prager, you're wasting a very large chunk of your life. We'll see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.